Hello, I'm Rama Lakshmi, and today we're going to talk about an Indian Prime Minister who hasn't really got his due in contemporary political historiography. And that Prime Minister is Lal Bahadur Shastri. And there is a new book, a new biography of Lal Bahadur Shastri. It's called The Great Conciliator, Lal Bahadur Shastri and the Transformation of India. He was a Prime Minister for just 2 years and he transformed India, and that is a biography written by author Sanjeev Chopra, and he's a prolific writer. This is his second book.
Yeah, second book, post-retirement.
Post-retirement, and he's a former civil servant. He was the head of Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration in Mussoorie, and most importantly for me, he's a columnist at ThePrint. Welcome, Sanjeev. This is a delight. I finished this book yesterday.
Thank you.
And so it's fresh on my mind. And guess what's fresh on my mind? The last chapter, which he calls the tragedy after triumph. And when we think about Lal Bahadur Shastri, there's this whole thing of how did he die, the abruptness and the suddenness of his death. And he had just inked the pact with Pakistan, India-Pakistan Tashkent Agreement, and he was in Tashkent. And he dies, and there are movies that have been made on it. There was a recent movie which, there's so many conspiracy theories around him. So I would really want you to tell the readers about what happened in the final few hours, the viewers, because the sympathetic way and very nuanced way in which Sanjeev has recreated the last few hours before he died. He's brought many versions of what happened those few hours. And so I would really like you to tell the viewers about it. But before that, there's something that really blew my mind, that just before he died, a few hours before he died, he scribbled on a piece of paper an Urdu couplet by Saqib Lakhnavi. And I have it written here and I'm going to read that out. It's beautiful. It says, Zamana bade shauk se sun raha tha, hami so gaye dastan kehte kehte. It basically means the world was listening intently, but the storyteller, that is me, I fell asleep narrating the story. And you even say that some looked at that scribbled note and said, was this a premonition? It's a lot like the mysterious death of Guru Dutt. We all want to know what happened in the last few hours. So it's something like that. Tell us about it.
Well, thank you, Rama. But frankly, as I mentioned in the book, that this book is about his life. It's to celebrate his life. And, I'm not a journalist. I'm a bureaucrat. And the training is that of a bureaucrat. So I'll go by whatever is available on the written records, right? So all these conspiracy theories are make very interesting reading. I read Anuj Thar's book, your prime minister is dead. But my issue is, that all these conspiracy theories could not have been, you can't have all these conspiracy theories together. You can't have the KGB killing him and the CIA killing him and Jan Mohammed, the poor cook of tea and call, killing him, or Indira Gandhi being responsible for the death. So I won't go into this because this is a subject for another thorough research, and I would not be able to comment much on.
No, I don't want you to comment because yours is a wonderfully researched book.
I have not researched on this subject. In fact, one of the reasons, and that's what Shekhar also said and others also said, that thank God it's a book on his life, because there's so much written about even Subhash Bose's death, and this takes away from the gravitas of their life. All I would say is that that it was a very tense moment for him. It was a very difficult moment for him because, after all negotiations in the world, all negotiations are a question of giving something, taking something. The fact is that the ceasefire line that India has agreed to with Pakistan has been there from 1949. We agreed to that. We agreed to that in 1965 also. We agreed to that in 1971 also. So it was an accepted line of control, which was there. So the fact also that we have to take into consideration is that all treaties are a subject of intense negotiation, and the moral and semantic victory that Shastri and India got at that time was the definition of Pakistan as the aggressor, because Pakistan was trying to project as if when India crossed the border in the Lahore and Sialkot sector. That is when the war started. But our point always was that the war started when the infiltrators entered into Cham and started moving towards, the capital of Jammu and Kashmir, which is Srinagar. So I think that is we have to look at it in that context. So I think we had won a major moral and semantic victory because the UN accepted the fact that yes, and that's why the significance of 5th August. In fact, 5th August is also the date when when Prime Minister Modi reorganized Jammu and Kashmir. Because 5th August is the date when the Pakistan troops had marched into Kashmir sector. So from our point of view, that is important. But frankly, the focus of the book was on his life, on his boyhood, on his
Absolutely.
childhood, on how he grew up. And I was trying to capture the time and space of
Absolutely.
Shastri's life.
Absolutely. But you also say toward the end that, after inking this historic pact, he made calls to his wife, his family, his daughter, and many people, the press wasn't kind to him. People in his own family were a little disillusioned with the agreement, so that may have upset him.
That could have been a major, that could have been playing on his mind, because after all, the fact is that he was a heart patient. The fact is that he was not in the best of physical health, which is something that we got to acknowledge. I mean, he had his first major stroke when he was still in the late 30s. He had his first stroke. He had another stroke when he just become the prime minister. But I would again think, Rama, that we should talk more about his life.
Absolutely. All of us, when we grew up, there's a slogan that's associated with Lal Bahadur Shastri, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, right? And many of us, so we go through school and we really don't know too much about him beyond this slogan. Almost everybody knows about this slogan, but beyond that, there's this granularity that you bring to his life, where he grew up, his as a minister, as a freedom fighter, and as a prime minister. There's so many things that I had not known. And it's particularly instructive to read this book today in 2025 March, because this whole question of Tamil language and Hindi imposition is up again. And Tamil Nadu there are a lot of people who are angry in Tamil Nadu. The so-called Hindi imposition is hot topic right now. And Sanjeev writes in his book that he was the prime minister when the 15-year period of English being the sole official language came to an end. So it was a very trying times for him, and how he addressed the nation and that whole conciliatory approach. What can we learn from how he handled the crisis then?
See, I think the most important thing that I learned from this 4-year research was that Shastri was very clear that you must listen to everyone, whether you agree or you do not agree. Patient listening is very, very important. And when you listen to the other person's point of view without taking a preconceived notion of what the outcome would be, then a lot of things can be sorted out. You see, when we go to a negotiation with a very clear mind that this is what I have in mind, then it is very difficult. But right from a very early childhood, he had learnt the art of reconciliation. He was learning to reconcile a lot of very different opinions. And I think that really helped him in this crisis as well, because imagine that even the Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, the person who was leading the Kisan movement was C. Subramanian, right? He was then the Food and Agriculture Minister, somebody very close to him. And yet such were the fires in Tamil Nadu, Madras at that time. In fact, Tamil Nadu that time it was still Madras. So he resigned. And therefore, there was a lot of political ferment at that time, but he was able to, conciliate, able to make a statement that, look, we will not impose Hindi, and Hindi will not be imposed till such time as there is a consensus in the non-Hindi speaking areas. I think that is very important, because let's also realize that there was a lot of pressure from the Hindi heartland at that point of time that Hindi should be made the only or the sole official language of the country. He was able to get that thing out, and basic thing was an element of trust. I mean, the trust which he could, when he made a statement, people would accept the fact that yes, the prime minister is serious and he believes. I mean, he will stand by what he has said.
And within his own party, he was being accused of being capitulate.
Yes, he was. In fact, Morarji Desai, and so many other people, the entire Hindi-speaking lobby, Jagjeevan Ram, Morarji Desai, Sampurnanandji, all of them were very, very keen that Hindi should be imposed. And in fact, as I had mentioned in one of my earlier books, that the moment the 1952 map was printed in Hindi and it was sent to Madras Secretariat, it was burnt. And that's a part of my first book, that how we had to reprint the maps in English because Hindi was not accepted. And therefore, the gradual acceptance of Hindi is something which he was very clear that if it has to be accepted, it has to be accepted by everyone, and that has to be a gradual process. So I think that is the important point that we get from his character.
Right, and you talk about a lot of the administrative reforms that he brought in. Let's first tackle the agriculture ministry. He overhauled the agriculture ministry.
Absolutely.
He brought in experts, agri-scientists for the first time, and 2 bureaucrats who went and did a talent scout, and they found M.S. Swaminathan and they brought him in. Can you tell us a little bit about how he approached the department, and then we'll go on to how he approached...
We'll go back to the Congress Agrarian Reforms report, which he wrote in 1935. In fact, another point about Mr. Shastri is that he was very empirical and very methodical in his research. In fact, the Congress Agrarian Commission report of 1935, it sets the template for the Commission on Agricultural Costs and Pricing. It set the template for the Zamindari Abolition Act. It sent the template even for MG Narega, because it was he who said that, look, in UP at that time, there were 4.96 crore holding. I mean, that 4.96 crore was the population of UP. He then went on to see how many people were actually holding land, how many people had land in excess of 1,000 acres. I mean, how many people were tenants? There were 55 lakh tenant farmers. There were another 11.5 lakh people who had land which was just about 10 to 15 hectares. So he understood that the solution to this country is in land reforms. The solution in the country is land to the tiller. The solution for this country is the abolition of all the extra taxes which were being levied by the zamindars. And UP had a terrible land management system because it was still a zamindari place. You see, unlike the Tamil Nadu, Madras presidency, and up in Punjab, where the land systems were more oriented towards the riots, where the farmers were paying taxes directly to the state. So this is the genesis of the UP Land Reforms Act.
Yes.
And of all land reforms acts in the country actually date back to the 1935 Congress Agrarian Commission report.
And then
when he comes and becomes the Prime Minister, at that time our food crisis was very intense. It was a ship to mouth existence. So he realized, and some movements towards modern agriculture had started happening, but he gave the real thrust to it. So that is the time when he realized that the agriculture department must have a clear distinction between management of agriculture and the research in agriculture. You see, before him, it was just the Department of Agriculture. He brought in the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Agricultural Research and Extension, which we now call DARE. He's the one who created the ICAR, and he was appalled to learn that scientists in the CSIR labs, for instance, were getting more money, more salaries than scientists who were working on agriculture. So agriculture was not treated at par with other scientific institutions. So it was perhaps more prestigious to be a scientist in the atomic labs or to be a scientist working in the other sector. So he corrected that. Not only corrected that, created the Agricultural Service, brought in Swaminathan, brought in Mr. Sivaraman who was then the Chief Secretary of Odisha, brought him in and gave that thrust. In fact, the state guarantee for minimum support price, that started with him. And he also realized that, it is one thing to say that we'll give minimum support prices, but if you don't have the FCI, how will you operate it? If you don't have an organization which will decide on a purely technical and a clear basis on what are the costs of cultivation, how are we going to compensate the farmer? So today we are giving, cost of cultivation plus 60%. But the basis of, the real jump in agricultural incomes, which took place in the mid 60s, is because of Mr. Shastri.
And you also mention that in the book he says that he had seen that the Soviets pattern of collectivization of farmland wasn't going to be possible in India because of small land holdings, and that he also said that Soviets do not have sufficient grains to feed their own people, and China was going through one of the worst famines of the century. So somewhere he felt socialism wasn't the way.
Let's understand that he was looking at socialism. I mean, he was not dogmatic about the use of the word socialism. So he many times he said that socialism is anything which works for the poor. Socialism is anything which works for the poor, for the farmer. Socialism is something which will actually, and this is an old debate which I mentioned in this book also, because when the Congress adopted the resolution on collective farming and cooperative farming, Charan Singh said that this won't work. And Gyani Zail Singh, has written there that, if he was all so convinced with Charan Singh that it won't work, but such was the personality of Nehru that we all supported. So, thank God that there were people who were actually farmers in the Congress at that point of time. So, cooperative farming as a principle was accepted in the 59 Congress Adhivation, but it didn't really roll out. And before Mr. Shastri, all interventions in agriculture were in the nature of let's grow more food,
Yes.
Let's do this, let's do that. But he clearly realized that unless there is a very clear, specific, scientific intervention in the way in which we are doing agriculture, things won't change. And a lot of credit will also go to Subramanian, because he was in the steel ministry earlier, and he looked at it in a very methodical and a very, very clear manner that, look, unless we do this, this won't happen. So I think it was the right combination which it sort of helped him in steering India towards that green revolution.
The sentiment that informed Shastri's policy toward agriculture was one that he held personally, that the farmers of India didn't get their due.
Yes, they didn't get their due, and that was based on the 1935 Agrarian Commission report, and he was also the pioneer in introducing the UP Zamindari Abolition Act in 37, 38, 39. So all the debates which happened in that period, which I've picked up from the Legislative Assembly records of UP, those are very powerful interventions which he made, because at that time there were the Muslim League wasn't really concerned about because they were a party of land, and there were two other parties, the National Agricultural Party, which was the party of zamindars, the big zamindars. Let's also remember that, he was doing this at a time when they had been elected only on a 10% vote. 1935 Act, only 11% of the Hindus and 9% of the Muslims had a vote. So it was a very limited mandate, and yet in that limited mandate, the Congress was taking steps to favor the majority of the farmers who were not really voters of the Congress. They were not really voters of the Congress at that time, because the 55 lakh tenant farmers did not have a vote. But his main thing was for those 55 lakh tenant farmers and the 11 lakh small farmers of Uttar Pradesh.
And now, as farmers come on the streets again, the whole agitation, do you think we can learn from?
No, I think today, Rama, the issue is a bit different, because the minimum prices have been assured, and it's more in the domain of politics, because it's a full conversation by itself. So I personally am not. I feel that given the way and what has the government said. Now we come back to the current government policies. At the moment, I feel that what the government of India said is that, look, we are not saying that MSP will not be there. We, in fact, are offering MSP for millets and for others as well. So it's a different story altogether.
Right. Staying on with the administrative reforms that he brought in, he set up the PMO. At that time, it was called PMS, Prime Minister's Secretariat. Today, it is the PMO. He set up CBI, CVC. Tell me a little bit about the PMO part. You said it brought a different kind of decision-making, leadership style, which was a departure from the Nehruvian.
You see, Mr. Nehru had this feeling that he knew everything. And he was so confident about himself, whether it was foreign affairs, whether it was agriculture policy, whatever it was, So he was not really a consultative leader in that sense. But this is not a book on Nehru, so we'll not comment on Mr. Nehru. It's very fashionable to be very critical of Mr. Nehru for everything that he does. But let's understand that Shastri was more consultative, and the lived experience of Shastri was very different from the lived experience of Mr. Nehru. So Shastri grew up as a lower middle class. Sometimes the family lapsed into absolute poverty. So he knew what it is. He knew what it is to what were the difficulties of being a farmer, and he. So his approach was very different, and he also even in that again brings us back to the PMS, because he realized that he does not know everything. He has to depend on experts. So when you realize that you need to depend on experts, your outlook changes. When you start with the assumption that you know everything and that everything must happen the way you want it to be, then you are giving directions. But when you are aware that there are areas in which somebody else knows more than you, and that is a part of his conciliation. He realized that there are many things that he does not know. So he was willing to bring those people in. LK Jha, for instance, he knew that he is not that he doesn't know everything about economics. He does not know everything about these things. So he brought in LK Jha. The foreign ministry also became more consultative. The home ministry became more consultative. So there was no preconceived idea in his mind that this is how the nation has to be run.
Yeah, and you do in your book talk about the fact that he had an ability to listen, and the humility and that he brought to decision making, and this whole cabinet style of governance, and that's what it was a departure from Nehru. You do talk about that. There's one other thing that you talk about, which is Ayub's Pakistan and Shastri's India. you you basically posit the two as two ends of a spectrum. Um, and you say in their approach to provincial autonomy, army, socialism, they were very different.
Absolutely.
And at a time when Shastri takes over as prime minister, he wasn't globally known, but Ayub had friends in the West, in France, in UK and US. He had great friends with those leaders. He was friends. And Shastri had not even traveled outside South Asia when he was the prime minister. Tell me a little bit about that moment when Ayub was in Pakistan and Shastri.
You see, let's go back to Pakistan in the late 50s and early 60s. They had a economic boom was there in Pakistan, because there was a lot of economic incentives that had been given to Pakistan because it was a member of CETO and CENTO. All these things were there. They had not done their land reforms. But more importantly, what was happening was that Pakistan was not recognizing provincial or linguistic autonomy. So Pakistan had merged all the four provinces of West Pakistan into one unit called West Pakistan and East Pakistan. India, on the other hand, and that credit goes not just to Shastri but also to Nehru and Patel and Gandhi and Ambedkar for the linguistic reorganization of the country. But most important thing was that there was a complete concentration of wealth that was happening in Pakistan. So in fact, Habib Jalali had written, that 20 घराने हैं आबाद, बाकी सब हैं निषाद, Pakistan Zindabad, Zindabad. So that sort of that redistribution of land had already started taking place in India. India was becoming more and more dependent on itself. By that time, India had 4 general elections. 4 elections, three elections, 4 elections. But not only elections to the federal government, but also elections at the state level. The army was firmly in check in India, whereas in Pakistan, Ayub Khan had taken over, the whole thing. So I think another very important factor that we have to understand is the role of political parties in India vis-a-vis the role of political parties in Pakistan. In Pakistan, political parties, political protest, discussions, all that had lapsed. There was nothing of that sort. And what was happening was that the politics of Pakistan was being fully determined by the West, whereas our politics was more germane. I mean, the issues that were there in our country, issues of poverty, issues of of employment, issues of language, issues of conciliation. All these were very much a part of the let's put it, the Congress culture of that time. The Congress culture of that time, especially when Shastri took over, was one of trying to build consensus. And Ayub Khan was totally dependent on the foreign aid that was being given to him. In fact, his book Friends Not Masters, that's not directed to the public of Pakistan. That's directed to the West. He says that, in fact, when he was being accused that you are being too coy with the West, he wrote that book, Friends Not Masters. And friends here refer to USA and UK and France and all these things. So he says that they are not my masters, they are my friends. So that book itself, I mean, the title of that book of Ayub Khan gives us an idea of whom he was addressing. His constituency was the West. Shastri's constituency was the country. Again, what was happening was that Shastri was building a professional army in India, whereas Ayub Khan, the professionalism of the Pakistan army had also been compromised, because when you have an army general as also the political head, as also the prime minister, see, Ayub Khan had combined, and that's something which I think he took from Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Because Jinnah also combined in himself the position of Governor General, the head of the Muslim League, the Prime Minister. So he combined, so this whole wish to centralize everything, and that I think is a very important lesson. When everything gets so centralized in the persona of one person, then policy making, consensus building, everything goes for a little toss.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, and the other aspect which comes out is, that you don't just measure the strength of a country by its GDP. You have to measure the strength of a country on many parameters. Those parameters are democracy, those parameters are free press, those parameters are academic excellence that's happening, those parameters are how you deal with protest, how you deal with mass movement. So I think all this is also very important,
Right.
which was happening in Shastri's India and not happening in Ayub's Pakistan.
And how was his globalism?
Whose?
Shastri's globalism.
Shastri was very clear. You see, Shastri continued with the policy of non-alignment, but even in this policy of non-alignment, there's one particular line which I like to share with you and the readers. You see, asked about, because China had already done its nuclear atomic testing it had done. When Shastri became the prime minister, they did it. So when he was asked, that what is your position on the India's nuclear and atomic policy, he said that Nehru had said ki kabhi nahi, India will never go, we will never look at the atomic option. So Shastri changed it from kabhi nahi to abhi nahi. He was sending a message also to China that, look, he was telling the world, he was telling the non-aligned movement, he was telling the Security Council that please rein in China, please stop them from doing it. But if they do not stop doing it, you see, after all, whatever happened in 74, I mean, what Mrs. Gandhi was able to do, the first peaceful nuclear test that we
when
did.
The Buddha smiled.
So, but it couldn't have happened at that point. It meant that this process would have started. Right. This process was on. So sometimes what happens is that we do not really give credit to, because even for the Green Revolution, the Green Revolution really flourished in Mrs. Gandhi's time. But the genesis was with him. So I think that is very important, that how he was building institutions. And you brought in the fact about institutions. So whether it was the PMS, which later became the PMO, the CVC, the Santhanam Committee report, and the Border Security Force. You see, the Border Security Force, the Railway Protection Force, those are very important institutional innovations which he brought about. Because without the BSF, it would have been very difficult to handle such a large border area of this country. Because Gujarat police was looking at it, Rajasthan police was looking at it, Punjab police was looking at it. Jammu Kashmir did not really have a very strong police, so it was Punjab police. Punjab police was guarding the Jammu Kashmir borders also.
Right.
And then here you had Assam, you had Bengal. So, and that was the reason why in 1956 the SRC, when it agreed for the reorganization of the southern states, it did not agree to reorganize Bombay or Assam or Punjab or Bengal, because it said that, look, these are states which have a border with Pakistan. So, and that was a very quick decision. So after the run of Kutch, immediately thereafter, this committee went in and given details of L.P. Singh has written about that in great detail. So the decision to make the BSF was done on 1st December 1965. Yeah. And today BSF is the world's largest paramilitary force. I mean, right. With an air wing, with a water wing, with a camel wing, with a horse wing. So it's the world's largest and most organized paramilitary organization.
Yeah, I found that chapter really fascinating. It has a whole chapter on Run of Kutch and how the BSF was, the skirmishes at the Run of Kutch and how the BSF was set up. There are many other little things that I that really blew my mind. One was that he introduced women bus conductors.
That's the point which Shekhar also made.
Yeah,
Women
many
bus
people
conductors.
don't know this. This was
Yeah.
like before the time of,
For the time of
way
independence,
before time.
In fact, there are many interesting. This Dr. Bhagwan Das, who was his mentor, and I've written about this in the print. When they brought out the Swaraj Manifesto, they said the voting age for women should be 21, and for men it should be 25, because they said that women are capable of taking a decision at 21, whereas it takes another 4 years for men to be able to take a decision. So we would have had a situation where men would have been
many little things that he was doing. He was just tweaking the system, that we seem to have forgotten. The other thing, which we all know, but it's not there. It's like a collective. It hangs over us, which is every time there's a train accident, there are calls for resignation, and there are these two words that I use, which is moral responsibility. The railway minister should resign, right? Who started this? Shastri.
In fact, I think he's the only one who has resigned after a major accident. And
two accidents.
And first accident, he submitted his resignation, but Nehru prevailed upon him and said, don't do it. But second accident, he said, look, sorry, I have to resign because there is a moral responsibility that I have.
And he says, I want to ease people's minds by resigning. And you say that this is haunting many railway ministers since.
It is. And it will continue. I don't wish accidents to take place, but there are issues and the ability to take a responsibility rather than pass it on. You see, there are two leadership styles, I would say. One is that if there is a problem, we find that, where can we pass this thing to? Can we pass it to the station master? Can we pass it to the railway guard? That's what is happening, right? But to take the responsibility that, all right, something wrong has happened. As the head, I take that responsibility.
Hindi mein kehte hain naitik
zimmedari. And I think, but also in the chapter on railways, you'll find that the entire change, the abolition of the third class, the intermediate class, introduction of air-conditioned trains, abolition of first class and all the non-trunk routes, all these were his innovations. Were things. First railway budget speech in Hindi was done by him, and this chapter on the railways also talks about how pathetic the railway conditions were. So we built this great myth. Even I grew up with this myth of the great Indian railways. The fact is that all of railways had been cannibalized during the Second World War. After 1935, all investments in the railways had stopped. And come Second World War, all our tracks were taken away. All our, the best of our engines were taken away. So what we inherited was a terrible railway situation, And this book also led me to read about one little known tract from Gandhi, on the traveling third class in the railways, and it's a beautiful passage which says that the food that you eat has been sampled by millions of flies,
I had done some research on Gandhi and the railways for the Railway Museum, so I'm aware of that. So he was very interested in the safety and the comfort of the third class railway, the lower class railway.
I think he was the only one who,
just like Gandhi was.
Yeah, just so. I think that's why we chose this cover with him.
Right. And I have always looked at Shastri, and obviously wrongly now that I know this book, as a placeholder in the dynastic democracy of India. Nehru, Indira Gandhi, and he was a 2-year placeholder, which is such a disservice to him. But it's not just me, many look at him as a placeholder. And yet, when you talk about the transition from Nehru to Indira Gandhi, you talk about the political maturity and the smoothness and the swiftness with which it was carried out. In fact, Shastri even asks Indira to take over, and she says, no, I'm grieving right now. And I like the word that you use, that India showed political maturity. And in his speech, I think it's his first speech to the party, he says, many leaders might have failed, but people never do, or people don't fail. This is beautiful what he said, right?
In fact, he would spend a lot of time on his drafts. You see, and that is another thing which, of course, Nehru also wrote his own speeches. I give him credit for that. But when you read Rajeshwar Prasad's book, his recall of Shastri, he said he would take such a long time in looking at what word he'll use. You see, as far as Shastri's spoken English is concerned, it was very average. But as far as written English was concerned, that was perfect. Because let's also realize, that his his mentors were all English teachers in school. I mean, his
Yes.
grandfather, his maternal grandfather was an English teacher. The uncle he stayed with was an English teacher. The person who had the greatest influence in his life, Nishkameshwar Mishra, he was also an English teacher. So his written English was superb, you know.
Right.
And therefore, the choice of words that he would use, he would write flawlessly in Hindi. His poems in Hindi are great. His Urdu ghazals were great. But his written English was also something to be looked at. Precise, clear, to the point.
Yeah.
Nothing very flowery, nothing very elaborate,
Absolutely.
but to the point, precise. I mean, something which any joint secretary would want to learn from him, you know. We'd like to emulate from him his writing style for cabinet notes, you know.
Yeah, the economy of
The
words.
economy of words.
Yeah.
And absolute clarity.
I always look at the past, recent past or ancient past, through the prism of museums. There is the Lal Bahadur Shastri Museum, House Museum in Delhi. You must have obviously visited.
I've spent a lot of time there, and
Right.
a lot of photographs have been picked
From
up
there.
from there.
So there, his puja room, his study, his bedroom, and all those things have been preserved as it were. So it's almost like when you go there, you're getting a glimpse
And the
you
old Fiat
peek
car,
into
he has a
the
Fiat
old
car.
1964 Fiat
Fiat
car,
car is
which
there.
he bought with a bank loan.
Yes, which he bought with
when
a
he
bank
was the
loan.
Prime Minister.
Yes.
So that still stands in the driveway. It's a quiet museum. It doesn't get the kind of crowd that, say, the Indira Gandhi Museum gets today. But it's a quiet museum. It needs refurbishing. It needs reimagination. It needs a 21st century makeover. But it's there and it's quite beautiful. And then I go to the Prime Minister's Museum, which has a whole section on Shastri. Like it has a section on many Prime Ministers. Have you been there?
Yes,
It has this badminton racket, and it has a whole diorama of Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, like, you know, in a three-dimensional imagination. So, you know, in terms of popular memory, not every child in school will get to read this. In terms of popular memory, all we have are these slogans, textbooks, and these museums in Delhi, right? For Shastri.
And now this book.
And now this book. But will school children be able to read this book?
I suppose, yes, when we go in for a Hindi edition, when we go in for a graphic novel.
Yes.
You know,
Are you planning to do that?
Well, I hope to do that, because I think this book ought to be written. I mean, the translation. You see, unfortunately, all our written records are in English. I mean, all the Congress presidential speeches are in English. All the correspondence has been in English. And I mentioned in this book that, you know, at some point of time when we scan more material in Hindi and Punjabi and Urdu and Gurmukhi and, you know, Tamil and Odia, a lot more would come up. But unfortunately, I mean, my hands were tied because the National Archives material is all in English. The PMML material is all in English. His written speeches are all in English. Though his speeches on the All India Radio, I've got transcripts of those in original Hindi. Those are very powerful speeches. And he has that sense of humor. He has that, you know, that great wit which always accompanied him. You know, for instance, when he's in Rajasthan and he's given a purse, he says, "आप बोलते तो बहुत हैं, लेकिन इतना कर दीजिएगा। माथुर साहब, आपने promise किया तो अब आप ये कर दीजिएगा, increase the kitty size."
Right.
So that sense was there with him. You know, that sense of humor was that, and you know, for instance, you may have, when he went to Nepal for the first time, foreign visit, and this is, "How do you like being here?" He says, "मैं तो disappoint हो गया, मैं तो थोड़ा disappoint हो गया." क्यों? He says, "पहली विदेश यात्रा, लगता ही नहीं कि हम विदेश आए." It looks like India, you know. So what an endearing way. Then in Belgrade, you know, when he was there, and the whole everything was vegetarian for him. You know, everything, everywhere he went, it was all vegetarian. Then he turned around and said, "Swaran Singh ji के बारे में सोच लेते." So he's not a vegetarian. So, you know, these little things.
Yeah, very wry, self-deprecatory humor as well. Yeah. Let me end with a question. Is 2 years enough to leave a political legacy for a prime minister?
You see, we have to look at it in 2 or 3 things which I'd like to share. The one was, you see, that India had a major debacle in 1962. We lost the war with China. We have to admit it, right? From 62 to 65, to take a country to victory, that was a great achievement of Shastri. It was the first time ever in the history of the country that somebody sitting in New Delhi crossed the Indian border. Before that, it was Ranjit Singh, but his was the Lahore Darbar. I'm not hereby saying that, you know, I mean, we've had the Chola Empire, we've had Marathas, we've had all these things, but the first person as the Prime Minister of independent India, the Republic of India, first time crossed the border and flew the Indian flag on several police stations in Lahore. That was his achievement. I mean, his achievement was that, look, we will not be scared. We will not be. And Pakistan had better tanks, they had better, ammunition, they had better, they were being armed by the West. But it was the sheer, and that credit will also go to Mr. Chauhan as the defense minister. So there's a very nice book called Debacle to Resurgence. And Mr. Shastri had complete faith in his defense minister, in the defense minister. He was the person who had, he was very frustrated in 1962 when he had gone to see what was happening in Assam. We had virtually given up Assam. Building up of those people, his rapport with the troops. I've personally met Brigadier Sujit Singh, who was then a major in the Sialkot sector. He got the Mahavir Chakra also. He would galvanize the troops. His sheer presence would galvanize the troops. And I think that was a major, I would say, major credit to him for having changed the way India looked at herself. In 1962, we just gave up. We just gave up. All right, it's happened. Look at the speech, that now with the sense of regret, we are going to lose. So it was a sheer, it was acceptance of a fait accompli, and the currency chests were burnt, the prisons were, prisoners were let off, all shock. The general at that time, he left for Delhi. The DC left, the SP left. So, it was a terrible situation. So, from that situation to get India to lead, to march with the best foot forward, to go and address confidence, I think that was his great achievement, the great achievement of Mr. Shastri.
So, in terms of...
In fact, that is the moment. In fact, but for 65, that confidence that we had in 71 may not have happened.
Yeah. Very important point.
So, I think that these are very important lessons from history. And I'll also like to mention, this his ability to, his mother was so conservative, not believe in intercaste dining, would not, so mother was so conservative. He respected Ammaji, and he wanted Lalita ji to participate in the freedom movement. He was very happy when she went picketing. And so what did he do? He got Kamala Nehru to talk to his mother to get Lalita Shastri to come and picket the shops, where foreign goods were being sold. So I think these are very important things. And one more point which I'd like to mention, the only book that he translated was on Marie Curie, and fascinating. And so I think there are many little aspects about him. The other, let me tell you something more. See, the way he addressed the non-confidence motion. So once, these people, this Communist Party person, they said, you're changing your position. He said, well, who hasn't changed the position? Did not Lenin change the position vis-a-vis Karl Marx? Yeah. Did Stalin not change the position vis-a-vis Stalin? And what is Khrushchev doing today? So such a hard-hitting speech which he gave. And that is all, because of the amount of reading that he did during the 5 sojourns that he had in jail. And I think that also made a lot of difference.
So essentially, you may look at him as 2 years of Prime Minister, but really psychologically, it was a quantum jump moment for India and Indian confidence. And, I was just going through the back cover of this book. Almost everybody here who's endorsed this book has talked about finally, overdue, long overdue, So, it looks like people were waiting for some justice to be done to his public memory. And this book seems to have done that. Thank you, Sanjeev.
Thank you.
I recommend everybody reads this book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.